Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. I sat there, staring at her. The woman I had called my wife for 5 years. The woman I had built a life with. The woman I thought I knew. But now, as she stood across from me, arms folded, eyes fixed on the floor, she wasn't my wife anymore. She was a stranger wearing her face. A stranger who had just shattered my world with a single, devastating sentence. I cheated because I needed a real man. For a second, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, there was nothing remotely funny about this, but because of how absurd it was. A real man? What did that even mean? Stronger? How? Physically? Emotionally? Financially? In what way had I supposedly failed to meet her arbitrary definition of strength? And why did she say it so casually, as if it were some self-evident truth I should have accepted long ago? Her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I waited for her to take it back, to show some flicker of regret. A single tear, a tremor in her voice, something, anything to show this wasn't easy for her. That this betrayal, this wrecking of our marriage, had cost her something too. But she just stood there, silent, impassive, waiting for me to break, maybe, waiting for me to scream, to beg, to collapse in a heap of anguish, so she could feel justified in what she'd done. Like my suffering would validate her choices, prove her right. And then, cutting through the silence like a blade, came a voice. Well, can you blame her? I turned slowly, my mind struggling to process what I just heard. Had I misheard? Surely, I'd misheard. But no. Her mother was sitting there, arms crossed, with the same cold indifference in her eyes that I now saw in her daughter's. Like they'd rehearsed this moment. You've always been too passive, her father added, shaking his head. She needed more from you. A real man would have seen the signs. My chest tightened. My hands curled into fists, but I said nothing. Couldn't. My mind was short-circuiting, trying and failing to make sense of what was happening. Her sister, lounging on the couch, shrugged lazily. Honestly, we all saw it coming. That was when it hit me. Not heartbreak, not grief, but clarity. A sharp, searing realization that cut through the haze. They weren't defending her. They were blaming me. I glanced back at my wife. No, not my wife, the woman I had wasted years of my life on. She hadn't said a word. She just let them speak for her like she always did. It was laughable, really. Predictable. I had worked tirelessly for years, pouring everything I had into providing for us, into building a life where she wouldn't have to worry about anything. And this was my reward. Not just betrayal, not just deception, but utter and complete disrespect. As if I had done this to myself. As if her betrayal was inevitable, because I hadn't been enough. I exhaled slowly, letting the disbelief melt away. There was no point in arguing. I could see that now. They'd already made up their minds about me. Maybe they'd never really seen me as part of the family. Maybe, to them, I'd always been the outsider, the provider they tolerated until I wasn't useful anymore. It had never really been my marriage. It had always been theirs. I looked at her one last time, searching for something, anything, that might make me feel like I was losing something precious. A flicker of remorse. A trace of the woman I had once loved. But I felt nothing. Not even anger. Just clarity. And that's when I smiled. That's when I laughed. It wasn't forced. It wasn't planned. It just happened, raw, unfiltered amusement at the sheer insanity of it all. The room erupted. Are you seriously laughing right now? Her sister snapped, sitting up straighter, her voice dripping with disbelief. Her mother leaned forward, her expression twisted in disgust. This is exactly what we're talking about. You don't take anything seriously. No wonder she needed someone else. I shook my head, letting the laughter fade into a slow, knowing smirk. Then I met their eyes, one by one, letting my gaze settle on each of their faces. They weren't just against me. They were convinced I was the villain here. You're pathetic, her father muttered, shaking his head like I was some kind of disappointment. Your wife is telling you she had to go elsewhere to get what she needed. And this is how you react? Her sister scoffed, folding her arms with a smug little smile. Honestly, just leave already, she said, waving a dismissive hand. You clearly don't deserve her. Deserve her? I almost laughed again. What had I done to deserve this? To deserve a wife who betrayed me? In-laws who spat on my dignity while I stood there, still processing the wreckage of what I thought was my life. But I didn't ask. There was no point. In their eyes, I'd already lost. And they weren't going to let me forget it. I glanced at her, this stranger who had once been my wife. She still hadn't said a word. Still just standing there, arms crossed, biting her lip, letting them fight her battle for her, like she always did. It was almost funny how predictable it was. I sighed, rubbing my temple, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle deep into my bones. So, let me get this straight, I said, my voice eerily calm. She cheats on me, lies to me, betrays everything we built. And I'm the problem. Her mother's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. You pushed her to this. Her father nodded, his face twisted in disappointment. A man who lets his wife feel neglected is no man at all. Neglected. That word almost made me laugh again. I had worked late nights, sacrificed sleep, and poured everything I had into making sure we had a comfortable life. I had been there for her. When she cried over petty fights with her sister, when she stressed over things that didn't matter, when she doubted herself and needed reassurance. I had held her, supported her, stayed loyal, present. And somehow none of that had counted. I glanced at her again, waiting, just waiting, to see if she would step in, say something, take even a shred of responsibility. She stood there, biting her lip, arms folded tightly across her chest, silent, detached. And in that silence, I finally saw it, the confirmation I'd been waiting for but dreading all the same. I had spent years trying to be the man she needed, but she had never wanted me. Not really. I had been convenient, and now I was disposable. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my keys, twirling them absently as the clinking sound cut through the rising chaos of voices around me. Her family, each of them louder, angrier, as if shouting would somehow etch their version of events into stone. I didn't care anymore. I had stopped listening. They were all still trying to drive it home, trying to make sure I walked out of here believing I was the failure, that this entire mess, this betrayal, was my fault. But their words didn't matter anymore. I had already made my decision. I turned toward my wife. She hadn't moved, still standing there, her face as blank as it had been when she delivered the blow that shattered everything. Still waiting, waiting for me to do something, yell, cry, beg, crumble. But I wasn't giving her that. She didn't deserve it. I shook my head, a smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth. You know what? I'm done. The words hit the room like a gunshot. Silence. For the first time that night, no one spoke. They just stared at me, stunned, processing what I had just said. Her mother was the first to break the silence, scoffing loudly. Oh, please, you're just being dramatic. I raised an eyebrow, slipping my keys into my palm. Am I? Her father exhaled sharply, shaking his head in disapproval. Her sister rolled her eyes. And my wife, she didn't even flinch, just stood there, arms still crossed, as if she were watching a scene she'd already seen play out a dozen times. I exhaled slowly and stepped toward the door. You all wanted me to take responsibility? Fine. I'll take responsibility for the one thing that actually matters. I reached for the handle, but her voice, sharp and sudden, cut through the air. Leave it. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't even anger. It was panic. I paused, turning my head slightly in her direction. But I didn't stop. Her father snapped. You're really just going to walk out? That's the kind of man you are? Running away. I let out a short laugh, low and bitter. You've been telling me all night I'm not a man, right? So why do you care what I do now? I pulled the door open. That's when the real panic started. Wait! She blurted, her voice rising. You're just going to leave? Just like that? I glanced over my shoulder. Yeah, just like that. Her sister scoffed from the couch, arms crossed, her face twisted in disdain. You can't be serious. You're really leaving everything over one mistake. I raised an eyebrow. One mistake. My wife's jaw tightened, and she straightened a little, as if bracing herself. I told you why it happened, she said, her voice clipped. I nodded slowly. Yeah, you said you needed a real man. I heard you the first time. I gave her a long, hard look. Long enough to watch her face flicker with uncertainty. Long enough to see, for the first time, what I hadn't seen before. Fear. Let him handle it, then, I said softly. Her eyes widened, but I didn't wait for a response. I stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind me, and let the night air hit my face. Just like that, I was free, or so I thought. My phone started vibrating before I even made it to the car. The first call, then another, and another. By the time I slid into the driver's seat, the screen was lighting up like a Christmas tree. I glanced at it, watching as the numbers climbed. 50 missed calls. Her name, her mother's, her sister's, even her father's. They were taking turns now, like I was some kind of call center and they were impatient customers demanding service. I didn't answer. Pulling out of the driveway, I rolled the window down just a crack, letting the cool night air rush in. And for the first time in a long time, I felt it. Peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally realize you don't owe anyone a damn thing. But they weren't ready to let go. As I turned onto the main road, the text started. Her. Are you seriously ignoring me? You can't just leave like that. Her mother. You need to come back and talk like an adult. Her father, coward. Her sister, wow. Real mature. Running away like a little boy. I smirked. They still thought they had power over me. That their words carried weight. Then, another message popped up. This one from her. I'm sorry. Okay? Just answer me. And there it was. The shift. From anger to guilt-tripping. From insults to apologies. The same game she'd played 100 times. Push and pull. Break me down, then reel me back in. But I wasn't playing anymore. The phone vibrated so hard it nearly slid off the seat. Another message. Her. Please just talk to me. Her. I don't want to lose you like this. We can fix this. Fix what, exactly? The years of trust she'd thrown away? The family who had taken turns cutting me down while she stood by and said nothing? She hadn't cared about fixing anything when she made her choice. When she let them gut me. Now that the silence had settled in, now that the weight of what she'd done was pressing down on her, she cared. I let out a slow breath, gripping the wheel tighter. Something inside me shifted, hardened. I reached for the phone, my fingers hovering over the screen for a moment. Then, without hesitation, I tapped exactly where I needed to. Block number. Tossing the phone into the glove compartment, I shut it and kept driving. Blocking her number should have been the end of it. But people like her, they don't just let go. They don't accept consequences. For the first few days, the silence was deafening. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was almost peaceful. But peace, I knew, was fleeting. And I was right. It started with mutual friends. People I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly checked in like we were old buddies. The messages all hit the same tired notes. Hey man, I heard what happened. You should really talk to her. She's going through a lot right now. Maybe just hear her out. You know? At first, I ignored them. I didn't engage. Didn't respond. Then the calls started. Kevin, a guy I'd known since college, was the first. We'd never been close, just part of the same social circle. I picked up, mostly out of morbid curiosity. Harold, man, how you holding up? I leaned back against the couch, rubbing my forehead. Why do you care? He sighed like he had the moral high ground. Come on, dude. It's not like that. I just think maybe you should talk to her. She's a mess right now. I scoffed. She wasn't a mess when she spread her legs for another guy. Jesus, Harold. He let out an awkward chuckle, as if to lighten the mood. Look, I get it. You're pissed. But you've got to understand, people make mistakes. Relationships go through things like this. I laughed. A bitter sound that left no room for misunderstanding. Mistakes? Kevin, she made a choice, A deliberate, conscious choice that spat in the face of everything I gave her. A choice she stood by until she realized her real man wasn't so real after all. Silence. I could practically hear him struggling to find the right words, grasping for a way to spin this into something I should just get over. Finally, he cleared his throat. I mean, I don't know, man. I just think maybe you should consider forgiving her. Yeah? I asked, my voice calm but cold. Tell me something, Kev. If your girlfriend cheated on you, let her whole family rip you apart, then stood there like you didn't matter, would you be so quick to forgive? That's not the point, Harold. No, Kevin. That's exactly the point. I ended the call, but it didn't stop. The next day, Jake called. Same angle, different voice. Hey man, relationships. I hung up before he could finish. Then it was Mason, one of her friends, pretending to be neutral. Dude, you gotta understand. Do I? I hung up. And so it went one after the other like they were taking shifts. Because that's what was really happening. She thought she could trade up, swap me out for someone more exciting, more dominant. Whatever it was she convinced herself she needed. But reality had a way of cutting through illusions. The guy she cheated with wasn't interested in playing the role I had. He wasn't going to pay her bills. He wasn't going to handle responsibilities. He wasn't going to clean up her messes. She wasn't a wife to him. She was entertainment. A fun little escape from whatever life he actually lived. And now that I was gone, now that she wasn't cushioned by the security I'd provided, now she was beginning to understand what she had really done. I got confirmation of it when I ran into an old coworker of hers at a coffee shop. A guy I barely knew but who apparently knew all about my situation. Dude, he said, lowering his voice like he was letting me in on a secret. She's been a wreck. I raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of my coffee. That so? He nodded, glancing around as if we were being watched. Complaining about money. Saying she doesn't know how she's gonna keep up with everything now that you're gone. I smirked, shaking my head. Sounds like a personal problem. He chuckled. Yeah, well, she was talking about how she thought he'd step up, The other guy. I didn't even have to ask who he meant. I just leaned back in my chair and let out a short laugh. But I guess that didn't happen, he added. Of course it didn't. I took another sip, savoring the irony. What did she expect? That a guy willing to screw another man's wife was suddenly gonna play husband? He shrugged. I mean, yeah, kinda seems that way. I shook my head, almost feeling bad for how predictable it all was. Let me guess, he's ghosting her now? Not completely, he admitted. But yeah, she said he's been distant, avoiding her calls, making excuses. You know how it goes. Oh, I knew exactly how it went. The same guy who had entertained her complaints about me wasn't so thrilled when those complaints became his burden. She gambled. She lost. And now reality was setting in. Her family, the same people who had lined up to condemn me, who had rallied around her when it suited their narrative, slowly withdrew their support as the true cost of her actions became apparent. Without the structure I had once provided, the bills piled up. Daily life became burdensome. The security she had taken for granted was gone, and reality hit her in ways she'd never anticipated. I knew all of this, not because I cared, not because I was checking in, but because people told me. Old friends, acquaintances. Some reached out with concern, some with curiosity, others with poorly concealed satisfaction at watching her downfall. One of them, Mike, an old college buddy who'd always seen through her, called me one evening. Man, you are never gonna believe this, he said, half laughing. Guess who showed up at Jen's party last night? I already knew the answer. Drunk? Crying? Mike exhaled. Both. She cornered Lauren, dude, and started rambling about how she made a mistake, how she didn't realize what she had until it was gone. I swear, it was like watching some shitty rom-com in real time. And the other guy? I asked, more amused than curious. Mike chuckled. Oh, he was nowhere to be found. Didn't even last a month after you walked out. Shocker. Huh. Not at all. I took a sip of my drink. Sounds exhausting. Oh, it was, he said. She kept saying you wouldn't even talk to her. That you just disappeared like she never mattered. Well, I said, leaning back. She wanted a real man to handle things, right? Sounds like she got exactly what she asked for. Mike let out a low whistle. Cold man. But I get it. You're not going back, are you? I exhaled, leaning back. Not even if hell froze over. And I meant it. There was no point in trying to mend something irreversibly broken. I had chosen my path. A path where I reclaimed control over my life. A path where I refused to be entangled in the consequences of a betrayal that was never mine to bear. With every update, every message from people who couldn't resist filling me in, my resolve deepened. I had let go for a reason, and while others might have wished for some dramatic confrontation, some explosive reckoning, or even a teary reconciliation, I was determined to leave no space for further drama. My former life with her had been a series of compromises and silent sacrifices. I had given more than I ever received. I had shouldered responsibilities without complaint, endured the small, daily dismissals, and ignored the creeping realization that I was being taken for granted. Now, as she struggled to manage her own affairs, it was clear. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge. It was simply the natural consequence of her choices. A relationship is built on mutual contributions, on respect, on trust. And when one partner decides to undermine that balance, the foundation crumbles. She had made that choice, and I had stepped away before the collapse became my burden. I ran into an old friend at the gym one morning, a guy named Alex, someone who had known us both, but had never taken sides. Man, I gotta ask, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead as we leaned against the treadmills. Do you ever regret it? I took a sip of my water. Regret what? Leaving. Cutting her off. Just walking away. I exhaled slowly, considering the question, but the answer was already settled deep in my bones. No, I said simply. Alex studied me for a second, as if waiting for some hesitation, some sign that maybe, just maybe, there was a part of me that still looked back. There wasn't. Damn, he muttered, shaking his head. Not even a little. Sometimes I admitted, I regret that I didn't leave sooner. That shut him up for a moment. So, no chance you ever go back? I chuckled under my breath. Alex, let me put it this way. Sometimes the best way to heal is to close the door permanently. Not to leave it open just in case. Not to keep it cracked. Hoping for reconciliation that never really exists. He let out a low whistle. That's cold, man. No, I corrected. That's survival. There was no dramatic comeback. No desperate midnight phone call, where she finally realized what she had lost. No teary confession that made me reconsider everything. Nothing. Time passed, and while I built something new, something stable and unburdened by misplaced expectations, she remained tangled in the wreckage of her own making. The absence of my presence, of my steady hand, served as a harsh reminder of the structure she had taken for granted. And while she attempted to rebuild, the experience left scars, some visible, some not. There was no poetic redemption in her struggle. No profound lesson wrapped up in neat little words. It was simple, cause and effect. She had made a choice that led her here, and now she had to live with it. In the end, my departure wasn't a defeat. It wasn't a surrender. It was a final statement. I had walked away from something toxic, something unsustainable, and I had never looked back. Because the man who never returned? He wasn't running away. He was moving forward. And as I continued on my own path, leaving behind the echoes of a past I no longer claimed, the message remained clear. When you lose sight of what truly matters, the cost is inevitable. And no amount of pleas or false promises can reverse that truth. Filing for divorce was easier than I expected. It was clinical, cold, just another legal process that stripped away the illusions of what once was. We hadn't been married long enough for her to bleed me dry. No marital property meant no settlement. Our 401k accounts were still small, and the portion I had to split with her didn't bother me. Money could be rebuilt. I wasn't about to fight for scraps when what I really needed was freedom. I signed the papers without hesitation. She hesitated. Not because she wanted to fix things. Not because she regretted what she had done. but because she was finally realizing she had overplayed her hand. I wasn't some desperate fool who would cling to the wreckage. I was done, and she hated that. The day of the final hearing, I walked into the courthouse with my head high and my mind clear. She was already there, sitting with her parents. Her mother looked exhausted, like the past few months had aged her. Her father, though, he looked angry. Good. The clerk called our case and we stepped forward. The judge barely looked up as she skimmed through the paperwork. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, addressing me, "you agree to the terms as written?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mrs. Reynolds, do you also agree?" She hesitated, just for a second, before nodding. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge stamped the documents. "Then, as of today, your marriage is legally dissolved. Alimony will be paid for 1 year as agreed. That concludes this case." And just like that, it was over. Or so I thought. As soon as we stepped into the hallway, her father stormed toward me, his face twisted in rage. "You think you can just walk away?" he growled. I barely glanced at him. "Already did. You ruined her life." He spat, his voice rising. "You abandoned your wife." I cut him off. "She stopped being my wife the second she spread her legs for someone else." His fist came fast, wild, sloppy, fueled by emotion rather than skill. I saw it coming before he even fully committed. I stepped aside, letting his swing cut through empty air. The momentum threw him off balance, and before he could recover, I countered. My fist connected with his jaw, a single, clean shot. He crumpled out cold. The hallway went dead silent. I rolled my shoulders, adjusting my suit, then turned to my ex-wife. She stood frozen, wide-eyed. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. I met her gaze, calm and steady. Then, with the same quiet finality as signing those papers, I said, "That is how a real man does business." Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time.